This is the offshoot or side story project of my main project, Japari Reality. The events of this story happen a little bit after the introduction of Japari Reality, after the part where I go to the library. Essentially, imagine if the narrator had significantly reduced travel capabilities. Chapter 1. I'm alone again. My adventure to the library was intriguing, to say the least. Finding out I'm well and truly a friend wasn't shocking on its own, but compounded by the fact I'm a human male made the entire revelation all the more jarring. I now belonged to Japari, but it didn't make a difference to me. I had wandered away from the library onto one of the innumerable trails in the forest area. I let my feet take me wherever they felt while I enjoyed the view as it went by. As I followed a trail I happened upon, I noticed how it seemed to become more trodden on as it continued. I felt like it led somewhere, so I followed it intently. I had nothing more than a slight feeling of it going somewhere of note, and was fully expecting it to go nowhere, but I kept on it. As I kept going, the sides of the trail became wider, the tree density became thinner, and more light came in from the canopy. I continued on the trail to what appeared to be an exit. An opening in the vegetation formed a barrier between the forest and beyond. I came to an open, slightly shaded clearing with short grass and two other trail entrances to my front and left. To the right in the distance was what looked like a Japanese-style building, obscured by trees in front of it. Intrigued, I began walking toward it through the tree-dotted yard. I noticed how parts of the grounds were deliberately made to be sunny or shady with tree placement and appreciated the detail. I kept walking toward the Japanese-looking building until I was hit by something. I heard a few footsteps from somewhere, and before I could react, I had the wind knocked out of me. My vision was still a bright blur of the trees above, but I could feel something heavy on my stomach. I began struggling harder, attempting to move, kicking my feet and thrashing my arms against the ground to no progress. My vision cleared, and I saw the torso of a brown figure above me, luminous amber eyes and ears like a deer. I thought I was going to be killed by a Lovecraftian forest creature, but with a tick longer recognition of the figure, I saw human arms, a human face, human shoulders, and a blank, stern expression. I paused my mind to see what my assailant would do next. They remained entirely motionless, as well as emotionless when I was attempting to free myself. My breathing was still incredibly rapid, and my heart thundered to the point it was the only thing I could hear. I noticed a large, pointed, horn-like spear that they were holding inches away from my face. In an instant, the thought of my life being ended by a killer friend flashed through my mind. I imagined that some friends did nothing but kill, and I was just the next victim. The fear in my mind scrambled any thoughts after that. "You're not a Sellian," my assailant uttered. "What are you?" The horns shifted in their grip, their expression still unchanged from a blank stare. They paused and remained completely motionless for a moment more. "Sellians don't breathe." My rate of breathing was still incredibly rapid from being winded, my fight-or-flight response not helping any for keeping my heart rate or breathing rate in check. My heart still deafeningly hammered out beat after beat. The weight on my stomach lifted, and the attacker moved out of my vision. As soon as I felt the lifting of restraint from my body, I hurriedly rushed to get as far away from them as possible. I awkwardly clambered to my hands and knees to run away, but when I looked back at the attacker, they were standing motionless. I got onto my feet and looked once more before running any further. They were still in their same position, unchanged. I stopped in my tracks. Everything in my body told me to run, but I didn't. I stared back at the figure, and they stared back at me. My vision fully cleared, and I could make out distinct brown patches on their clothing. They were holding their spear at a downward angle, and were standing in a relaxed but ready position. They didn't pose a threat anymore, and when their words about me not being a Sellian processed, I understood what had happened. I composed myself for a moment to calm my heightened nerves, and began my approach to them. It took me a moment to get ready to move any closer to them, but I remained as calm and as natural as I could. As I stepped toward her, the colors of her clothing became much more distinguished. Her hair on the very top of her head was a very dark brown color, closer to black, and coming out of this section were two thin, irregularly curved horns. The hair below the topmost black section was a light cocoa color, retaining the same shade to the ends of her hair. From the brown section, two deer-like ears stood near her horns. Her hair was swept back to the rear, with two brown strands from her bangs going to either side of her face. Her clothes continued the two-tone motif, with cinnamon brown and black serving as the two main colors. The collar in front of her shirt was brown, with the same color extending along the front of her arms to her rolled-up sleeves and down the front of her skirt. The sides and back of her shirt were black, and the sides of her skirt extended the black color, but were interrupted by a section of brown along the rear. She wore long black fingerless gloves that extended under her shirt with brown patches on the inner forearms. She wore three-tone leggings. Below the knees was cinnamon brown, above the knees was black, and on the inner thighs was a skin-colored, almost cut-out looking section. Her tail was like that of a bovid. brown until ending with a fluffy black-tipped ending. Her deep brown eyes locked with mine as I moved closer, showing some signs of emotion behind her stern veil. I first went to retrieve my backpack, which had been moved several feet from where I'd initially fallen. She watched me intently as I advanced, only moving slightly to keep me in view. I moved directly toward her position after I got my backpack, watching how she reacted as I approached. She stayed relaxed, and her expression changed from stern to curious as I came closer. With a bit of time, I came into talking distance of her, despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Are you hurt?" she asked, sounding more like a statement than a question. "I'm okay, just a little frazzled." "I see. I was out searching for Sellians, and I've heard rumors of mimic Sellians. You aren't a Sellian." She paused and looked me over. "Sellians don't breathe. What are you?" "I'm a human male friend. The owls told me that." "Very well. My mistake for the ambush, since you aren't a Sellian. Do you need a moment to rest? You still look a bit frightened." "I guess so." "Come with me." I followed her to a large oak tree, and sat back against it to catch my breath and let my racing heart slow down. She kneeled on both knees beside me and gave me an empty stare like before. I reasoned that this was the only way she knew how to communicate, especially compounded by the way she spoke in monotone, curt sentences. She was very stoic, only showing emotion if absolutely necessary, and entirely devoid of any usage of body language. She very obviously had a lot of rigor in her character. I wondered why that was, so I probed her by chatting with her. "So, why were you searching for Sellians?" I asked, hoping for a helpful answer. "I hunt them. It's what I do. I spend most of my day searching and fighting Sellians." "Why?" My simple question must have ignited something in her, as she was visibly taken aback by it. She wasn't offended, more so confused that anyone would ask that. "Well, the way I see it, if I'm good at fighting, I shouldn't waste my potential. I found that I'm quite good at this, and if no one else is going to dedicate their time to fighting Sellians, then I should do it." "Well, I see then. Quite selfless of you." "Where were you going before this?" she asked in return. "I wasn't going anywhere specific before. I was just wandering around and came across that Japanese-looking building over there. I was going over to it and, She interrupted me. "The dojo, that is my home." "Whoa, really? Can I see it?" I asked, likely too excited. She returned a nod and stood up. She extended an arm to help me up, and began our walk across the rest of the field to the Blue Roof Dojo. I had fully calmed down by this point, and was fully back to my normal self. My hands and elbows still ached from being bashed against the ground, and my strides were a bit wobbly after getting up, but I was fine aside from that. We came to the front of the dojo, where many tall double doors spanned under the overhang of the round tiled blue roof. Some doors were already open, some wide open, and others just a crack. She entered through the largest set of doors at the center of the building, and I followed inside. Inside, there were blue gym mats spanned across segments of the floor, with extra rolls of them positioned in a corner. The tan wood floors reflected the light entering from the paper and wood grid patterned walls, akin to a traditional Japanese dojo. There were a few fighting dummies around, and some of them appeared to have slash and puncture wounds in them. I followed her into a room on the right side of the building. It had a makeshift bed made from blue mats stacked on top of each other with assorted linens on top, a small table, a single chair, and a metal cabinet. This was her bedroom. It was a little dirty. A small amount of grime around the edges, discarded scraps on the floor, and signs of hasty cleaning in certain areas. The whole room was quite cramped as well. There wasn't much space to reorganize or get properly cleaned anyway. "This is my room. It isn't much to look at." She stepped out of the room and I followed. I was then struck by the realization that I never got her name. I felt a little embarrassed that I didn't ask yet, so I asked immediately. Hey, I didn't get your name. Sorry I didn't ask earlier. My name is Topi," she returned, cutting me off. "I'm Havix," I replied, trying not to be as curt as she was. She placed her horn spear against the wall outside her room, next to which were other discarded spears. The other ones had large chips and breaks in them, the outwardly curved edge and tip having the most obvious damage, and the spears having what looked like attempts to sharpen them. I paused to look closer at her broken weapons, observing the nuances between them and the scrape patterns along the edge. "You're interested in my spears?" she asked, startling me out of my focus of her weapons. "Yeah, I was just looking at the edges of them." "Did you sharpen them?" I returned. "Yes, I did," she answered, and then picked up a very old, partially disintegrated-looking spear. "This is one of my oldest ones. I found that when one would chip, I would become much more efficient at fighting Sellians."
I then tried sharpening an edge on the horn to the same effect. In use, the horn part of the spear acts like a sword, and I would cut through Sellians instead of puncturing them. After I discovered this, I dedicated myself to fighting Sellians.
Whoa, I stupidly reacted to her explanation.
She placed back the old spear and picked up her newest one. She handed it to me, handle first, and I took it. I looked at the sharpening on the edge and noticed how well it was done. It was by no means razor sharp, but more than enough to need to be careful around. The sharpened side of the weapon was longer than the dull short side, and it handled much more like a sword than a double-sided spear. As I held it, I noticed how light it is compared to how large it is. It felt as if it were hollow, but it very clearly wasn't. I finished observing it and handed it back to her. She placed it against the wall and walked to the blue mats on the floor. "Would you like to play fight to train?" she asked. "Play fight?" I replied, not knowing what she meant by that. "Yes, a fight for training. Not to hurt, but to practice. Go until you or your opponent is pinned." "Sure, I guess." My curiosity led me over to her. She kneeled down on the mats, and so did I. "Do you understand the purpose of this?" "Yeah, don't do anything to hurt, no hits to the back of the head, keep it above the belt. I've done something like this before, I think." "Very well. Are you ready?" "Yeah, but go easy on me. I'm not sure how strong you are." I largely played defense for the first round, just holding my ground and blocking her moves. I wanted to get a feel for her strength and strategy, and once I felt I understood her tactics, I let her pin me and reset for another round. The second round started off similarly, with me taking defense, but I slowly started making advances and got more comfortable with the feeling of fighting. I managed to get her pinned, but only out of technicality, since I sort of trapped her arm under her back and restrained the other one. The third round I went much more offensive, and surprised her with an actual challenge. Midway through, I realized how intricate our strategies were developing, despite this just being a play fight. I finished off the third and final round by pinning her, this time properly. She seemed stunned at the fact I managed to beat her, but took the loss well. When we finished, it was starting to become evening. I thought about leaving and finding another place to stay, but something in the back of my mind told me to stay with her. She seemed interesting, and I felt if I stayed with her long enough, I could help her with her Sellian hunting, which she was so passionate about. Since we had little to do, I took some time to clean up around the place with Topi, getting dust collected, equipment put back, storage organized, and her room tidied up. I also discovered that the walls were removable, and that there were a few spare ones inside the storage area. With Topi's help, we expanded the size of her room and made a room for me next to hers. I copied her blue mat setup and borrowed some of her makeshift bed sheets for the night. For dinner, we had one Japari bun each, and afterward, we went to bed. I laid awake for a while, just trying to comprehend what happened that day. I started off getting attacked by a stranger, and then later on gained their trust to stay in their house and even play fought with them. I still didn't know much about Topi, only that she hunted Sellians, didn't like talking, and found out how to sharpen her weapons. She was still mysterious. I didn't understand what made her tick yet. I imagined silly backstories she could have until I drifted asleep. Chapter 2. Topi woke me up early in the morning. The day had just begun, and the inside of the dojo was quite dim, despite the paper walls allowing light through them freely. I was still quite sleepy, but got out of bed and got dressed to see what Topi was up to. "You're up now." "Good. Are you willing to hunt Sellians with me?" she asked. "Sure. When are we going?" "Now, if you're ready." "I'll need a minute," I replied. I had part of a Japari bun and plenty of water for my breakfast, then told Topi I was ready. Before we left the dojo, we did some stretching together to get ourselves primed to fight later on. She grabbed her spear on the way out, and we began our hunt. We started our hunt on a trail Topi was familiar with. The trail was quite well defined. It seemed to be a trail made by deer or just by someone walking on the path enough times. The area under the tree cover was very open, with only thin, wiry trees blocking the open path. It was so open, you could run in a perfect straight line off the trail and not have to dodge anything in your way. The only thing that could stop you were the enormous trees that provided the actual canopy to the forest. As we went further along the trail, the way forward was less clear, and it seemed to curl off in a random direction. Topi kept walking along a path I couldn't see, and then sharply turned at a seemingly random spot. We walked for another few minutes, and made another sharp turn. We continued for a few more feet, then she stopped. She flicked her ears and panned them left and right. She looked back at me. "Are you ready to fight?" she asked in her usual monotone voice. "Yeah, are there Sellians nearby?" I asked. She flicked her ears again and looked forward. She moved her spear in front of her and slowly kept moving forward. There was something unseen around, but she couldn't tell what it was. The tree density to our front and right blocked sight past 20 feet in the woods and obscured anything that could be lurking within. I heard a low, deep, fluctuating vibrato sound of a Sellian nearby. Topi heard it too and told me to stay back. A red, spherical, solid-formed Sellian floated out from the denser area toward us. Topi sprung into action immediately, running toward the Sellian and taking a slash at it, stunning it in place. She then took another slash, cutting it in half all the way to its center. The Sellian fell to the ground, where it rapidly dissolved away, rather than popping into a shower of diluted sandstar cubes. Another Sellian made an appearance from out of the woods. This time I wanted to try fighting it. I shouted to Topi that I wanted to take it, and she let me have it. I ran toward it like Topi did, and threw a boxing-like punch at it to see what it would do. As my fist contacted the soft green eye of the circular foe, I felt its outermost shell deform, stretching and then breaking, and my punch carrying through, moving the beast back a few feet in the air. I moved closer to it again and repeated, this time the punch bursting the Sellian into a spray of the familiar diluted sandstar cubes. "Good kill," Topi congratulated me. To her right went an array of advancing Sellians. I pointed them out to her, and we advanced toward them. I took the right side of the group, and Topi took the left. I used the same punches like I did before, and switched it up with strong kicks for a few of the smaller ones. Most of the Sellians burst with one strike, but some needed two. Topi made quick work of her fights, but I needed some more time for mine. She watched me fight the last of the Sellians, making sure I didn't mess up or get hurt. When we finished, Topi didn't say anything to me. Her emotionlessness didn't help my attempts to see if she was satisfied with my performance. I waited a moment to see if she would say anything, but she didn't. She simply carried on the hunt silently. I got behind her again, as she resumed our seemingly random path through the forest. We went deeper into the woods, where the vegetation became denser, and there were many more places for Sellians to lurk. Topi heard Sellians again, but this time she didn't say anything to warn me. She slowed our pace to a crawl and readied her spear. 5 Sellians appeared from various places, each a different color and shape. Some were similar to the rigid type, having definite limbs and parts, and others were loosely shaped, only defined by their single color. I let Topi take her pick of the Sellians first, and I took what was left. I sailed a strong punch into the center of a green Sellian, and stepped left to fire another punch into a Sellian behind the first one. I pivoted over to another Sellian with short blue tentacles, managing only a light strike onto it, sending it back about a foot. I moved myself back to the second Sellian, finishing it off with a left hook, and to see the first Sellian fragmenting away on the ground. To finish off my last opponent, I let it draw near and used my body weight to throw an extra strong punch at it. It fractured and popped on impact, showering me in sandstar dust. Topi had finished her Sellians before me and was idly standing by, watching me go. She turned around once I had regained my composure and walked back into the open wooded section. We walked back to the main trail we started from, Topi somehow retracing her zigzagging path. When we were nearly back to the dojo, she finally spoke about my performance. "You did a good job. You will need training, however." "Thank you. I was going to ask how I did." When we reached the dojo, Topi set up a punching dummy for me. She explained that she wasn't experienced in my hand-to-hand style of fighting, but she saw things that could be improved. In truth, I wasn't very confident in my boxing style. My prior experience was some sparring and video tutorials on how to fight, but I was still relying on instinct for what to do. To test my current fighting ability, Topi instructed me to imagine that the dummy was a Sellian and to fight it until she said stop. I threw a few different kinds of punches, trying to mix up my approach and to see what felt right to do. The rubbery coating of the dummy didn't quite feel like a Sellian or human skin. When my bare knuckles contacted it on a punch, it made my skin feel like it was sliding and gripping at the same time. I kept going for about 30 seconds until Topi told me to stop. When I stopped, it felt like my knuckles were on fire. She told me my punches weren't straight, and I was letting my hits slide too much. She also told me to correct my posture, as I didn't look confident while moving. She demonstrated what I should stand like, and asked me to box the dummy again. I went for another few seconds, and by the end, my hands were red. I focused too heavily on my posture and trying to keep my guard up that I forgot to punch straight, and had injured my hands again. I knew what I was doing wrong, so I practiced punching in slow motion, trying to correct myself and find what worked. I felt that I had it all put together, so I went back to the dummy. I let a few punches out and felt the skin of my knuckles wear away again. I had gotten better, but not good enough. I continued firing off ones and twos, trying to get better, but my skin opened more and more with each imperfect blow, leaving red marks in the impact spots. I felt as if I were doing something simple wrong, and with enough punches thrown, I would get it right. The pain in my hand seared, but I forced it out of focus in my pursuit of getting it right. Topi had to shout at me to get me to stop so I wouldn't continue bleeding more. She helped me clean up my hands and patch over my bloodied knuckles. I felt upset that I even let myself get to that point of self-injury, letting myself punch my knuckles raw because I felt I could do a little better. In a rare stroke of sympathy from Topi, she explained that she went through the same things I did. When I first started to train my fighting style, I did something similar like you did. I tried doing a slash, but each time it wouldn't go how I wanted it to. I would try again and again, until I hurt myself or until I got it right, I interjected, understanding the fault in my training. Like tunnel vision. The focus on one thing so strong you don't realize what you're doing to yourself? I understand. Tunnel vision. That is how you describe it? That's what I call it, at least. Thanks for getting me patched up. I cleaned off my blood spots from the dummy and had lunch afterward. We didn't do very much for the rest of the day since my hands weren't very usable with the bandages on. In the evening, I tried doing some kicks on the dummy, just to see if I was even good at it, but I found my balance and posture to be lacking. I practiced it for a while, making sure I was actually making progress and not just doing the same thing over and over like before. Topi kept watch of me as I trained, studying my demeanor and how I carried myself through a fight. She talked to me about my philosophy of combat after I finished practicing kicks. So, what do you think of when you're in a fight? You are much different from me, she asked in her usual monotone voice as always. I usually don't think out complete, full thoughts when I'm in a fight. Sometimes I do, like if I need to do a complex series of maneuvers or if there's something I desperately need to adjust or keep in mind. I usually just have impulses of action, like I don't think to block and how I'm gonna do it. I just move to the position I know best and take it from there. And what is your strategy? She asked, showing intrigue. I like to make my strikes deliberately. I don't really like the little taps to make my opponent flustered, especially now since Sellians don't even understand what emotion is. I like to limit my attacks to ones I know will connect and do damage. I'll still throw jabs, of course, but I'd rather have hard hits. Now for Sellians, those pretty much only take hard hits, right? Can you even tire them out? No, not exactly. You will have to strike them hard to kill them. There isn't any other way to do it. She paused and stared at me with her emotionless gaze. Continued. I like your way of fighting. You might do well with a spear like mine. Maybe, but I'd like to get good with my fists first, as I'll always have those. Maybe later on you could teach me how to fight like you do. Potentially, she returned in a noticeably unenthusiastic tone. We didn't do anything for the rest of the day. Since the sun was setting, we only had an hour of sunlight left. As I was going to sleep, I recounted the day's events, and remembered how much Topi stared at me throughout the day. Even after she bandaged my hands and finished my serious training for the day, she kept watch of me. I imagined that she still distrusted me and was watching me to see if I would turn on her or something similar. The way she didn't show any emotion or sign of thought while she looked at me confused me to no end. I even stared back at her for a while, trying to get her to look away or smile or do anything other than glare at me. I fell asleep for another night, feeling unsatisfied with my understanding of my bovid companion. Chapter 3. Topi woke me up early in the morning again. It was hunting time, so I took off my bandages and got ready to go. Once I was ready, we stretched to get loose and headed out of the dojo. She took us across the dojo's lawn and onto the trail I came out from the day I met her. She took us deep into the woods, far off the trail that I knew. As we went further into the denser woods, the ground became much more uneven, with tree roots popping out of the dirt, tripping me up if I wasn't careful.
We continued walking for an excruciatingly long time. Topi didn't even hear anything like Sellians around. She said that it might still be too early for them to be up and moving around, that we might have better luck finding some in the brighter areas. We walked back to the trail entrance, over to another side of the lawn, and onto a different trail. We followed the inclined path for a short while, then went up a steep hill to a densely packed, yet bright wooded area. On my way up, I tripped into the back of Topi, startling her. I must have attracted Sellians with my commotion, as several came up the hill after us once we reached the top. They all came from a single direction, but our space to fight was limited by the trees around us. I tried a moving 1-2 punch on my first Sellian. It shattered on contact and revealed a larger, tentacled Sellian behind it. I tried throwing a hook at it while my weight was shifted to the left, but as I let the hook go, I slipped and missed the Sellian completely. My footing was totally incorrect, and I had to catch myself from falling over completely. I hastily reset myself and took out the Sellian in front of me. I glanced over at Topi's side of the battle as she cut a dark purple Sellian in half diagonally, with more coming after that. I pivoted back to my battle and took out an incoming tall Sellian with a kick. More came, and more punches and kicks were issued. The last Sellian I fought was a green, crescent-shaped Sellian, which I had a lot of trouble dealing with. I tried punching it, but it read my attack and dodged out of the way. I tried kicking it, but fell short. I tried to punch again out of desperation, but fell on the ground from losing my balance and exhaustion. Topi finished it off with a slash from her spear. "Get up," she demanded. She picked me up and brushed me off quickly. "I'm sorry, Topi. I made a mistake. It was an accident." I apologized, very embarrassed that I had to have her help to fight a single Cillian. "You're all right. Good." She looked me over for a moment. "Follow me." She took me back down to the dojo. On our way back, I noticed that my wounds had reopened, and that I was bleeding again. I reasoned that I might need to use gloves for fighting from now on, unless I wanted to get an infection from having an open wound at all times, since I would be fighting often. When we got back to the dojo, Topi patched my knuckles again. I kept apologizing for not being helpful in the last fight, until she told me not to worry about it. "You had a bad fight. That is all. You made some mistakes, which is okay. You need to learn from those mistakes," she told me. "I know what I did wrong, having you pick up after me when I fail just feels wrong, like I'm not being helpful," I replied bashfully. "You're learning. You have to learn yourself somehow." I didn't do any training for that day. I kept replaying the events of that fight over and over in my head, thinking about everywhere I went wrong. I analyzed what I could have done differently, and cursed myself for my stupid moves I did in desperation. For as much as I thought about what I did, I knew I couldn't change the past and move forward from it. Topi continued staring at me like she did yesterday. I finally worked myself up to ask her why she stared at me constantly. I walked over to her and sat in front of her. She stared directly into my eyes like usual and didn't think anything of me. "Topi," I began. "Yes?" "Why do you stare at me so much?" Several emotions crossed her face. She broke her stern veil for a moment, letting her surprise pass for a change. I had cracked some part of her shell. "Well, it's because I don't trust you. No, I can't trust you yet. I can't trust you," she stammered out. Everything about her told me that she was hiding the truth. She spoke louder than usual, her voice a higher pitch. Her eyes darted around the room, her shoulders scrunched. She covered her hands and sat up taller. I didn't want to unsettle her more, so I played along with her lie. "You don't trust me?" "I trust you, Topi. I understand why you don't trust me yet. We only met a little while ago, and I'm not a very good fighter. I hope I can gain your trust somehow." She returned a nod, and I stood up. She didn't follow me with her gaze. Instead, she very sharply looked away from me. I knew I had struck a chord with her, so I let her handle her emotions alone, so she wouldn't have to keep them hidden around me. I stepped outside for a bit and explored around the dojo's exterior for a while. I made a lap around the dojo. Through the paper walls, I could hear Topi talking to herself, muttering something like, "No, I don't. I can't." I told her through the wall that I would be going on a short walk and that I'd be back soon. She told me to be safe and to keep my guard up while I was out. I walked across the open lawn and sat against one of the trees facing out toward the bright area. I watched the wind roll over the grass and rustle the trees' leaves for a while, taking in the sights and sounds to give myself something to do. I shut my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, I saw a dark-clothed friend making their way across the field. They had waist-length black hair, with silver at the front, and short, white-fronted ears poking up from each side of the dark brown section at the top of their head. They wore a brown jacket that from afar seemed to be too large for them, a black button-up shirt, and a white skirt. They had long black fingerless gloves extending halfway up their forearms, and over-knee black boots with white tips at the toes and brown fur around the top. They had a round black and silver-based tail with a black beginning just below the edge of their skirt. "Hey, you over there!" I shouted to them, standing up to make myself more visible. They walked over to me happily, and I met them in the sunlight. When I had a clear view of them, they had an X-shaped scar under their right eye, and their jacket turned out not to be too large for them. Instead, they wore their jacket by the collar, only buttoning up the top button to keep it on, and letting the rest act as a cape. They didn't use the sleeves either. They left them off and let them be a part of the cape as well. Around the collar of her brown jacket was a white flame pattern. She extended a hand to me for a handshake. I gave her a firm greeting handshake while she gave me a toothy grin. "Nice to meet ya. I'm Wolverine," she greeted me with an intense, energetic voice. "I'm Havix. Nice to meet you too, Wolverine." "You wouldn't have happened to seen a brown friend around, would you? She has a big spear, horns, orangey brown clothes," she asked. "Topi?" I I replied, since she's the only orangey-brown girl I know.
Yeah, I was looking for her. Where'd you see her?
Oh, she's in the dojo. Her and I are staying in there for a while. Do you need her?
I was just going to chat with her for a while. She and I are good pals.
Surprised at this, I responded. Oh, you are? I thought she'd stay alone most of the time. She seems like she doesn't like people very much.
You've spoken to her? Wow. I thought she would only talk to me. I thought I was the exception, she exclaimed.
Yeah, that's a bit of a story. I told her about how we met and the Cellian Fightings adventures we went on. Wolverine commented how on character Topi was throughout my stories. She smiled and laughed at my jokes and observations, which was a nice change to have from Topi's stoicism. I told her almost everything except the last interaction we had, where I flustered her by asking why she stared at me. I had another instance of something in the back of my mind telling me not to do it. I walked back to the dojo with Wolverine. We went in the front doors and found Topi sitting cross-legged on the mats, staring blankly at the ground, motionless. It was a candid view of her, seeing what she did when no one was around and while she had nothing to do. When she noticed our presence, she stood up to greet us. Wolverine greeted Topi with a handshake and toothy grin, and Topi returned a handshake and blank expression.
Hello, Wolverine. Havix as well.
Topi started.
How have you been, big girl?
Wolverine beamed.
I have been well. You must have met Havix. He and I have been fighting Cellians together since we met. He is as good as a fighter as you are. He has much higher adaptability than you do. He's also very intelligent. He discovered that the walls here are movable and helped expand my room and created a room for himself. I've heard that humans are really smart. Ooh, have you seen his wild release yet? I can only imagine what a human is capable of then.
I added in. I'm not sure humans even have a wild release at all. I haven't ever gotten to that point yet.
Maybe we'll find out then, Mr. Havix,
Wolverine added.
So what are the Cellian numbers like these days, huh?
Quite high. You may want to stay near this area for a while, in case either of us needs help fighting.
This is one of the highest areas for Cellians in the park.
I was fascinated with that statement.
This is one of the hot spots?
Topi responded before Wolverine.
Yes, there is an abundance of Cellians around. I believe this is one of the major areas where Cellians are formed. Most are low-level vermin, but some come to be major threats.
Wolverine backed her up.
And we do our part to keep them down.
My, how valiant of you two. I hope I can keep up with the task. Topi and Wolverine continued chatting for a while about the state of the area and things they had done. Wolverine had many more stories to tell than Topi, most of them about meeting friends and short fights she had with Cellians. While they were talking, I noticed that Topi still took time to look at me. She would stare right at me while she was thinking of a word, while she listened to Wolverine, and any time I moved. She didn't seem so intense with her gaze now, instead appearing much more relaxed and comfortable with me. I also noticed in Topi's word choices that she was much more kind to me than Wolverine. I reasoned it was because Topi knew Wolverine much more than me, and that they got along very well. Despite Topi's stoicism, it was clear they had the same level of friendship between them. As Wolverine was leaving, she pulled me outside with her. She said that she had some things to tell me about Topi before she left.
Okay, here's some things you should know about Topi. She's a great girl, don't get me wrong, but she can be a bit strange. Anyway, you should play fight with her often. She loves play fighting. Next, don't take her spear if she puts it down. That's a big no-no.
Why's that? I asked.
I don't know. She might not trust anyone with it since it's sharpened or because she values it. Oh, and one thing from me before I go. From now on, you can call me Kazuri. That's my nickname.
She patted me on the shoulder and said,
Bye-bye, Mr. Havix.
Wolverine, or Kazuri, was certainly an exciting individual and a good friend for Topi. I entered the dojo to find Topi patiently waiting for me inside.
Wolverine is a good friend of mine. She has helped me many times.
She welcomed me back. Thinking about Kazuri's advice, I returned, Topi, would you like to spar?
Oh, yes I would. Would you like gloves so you don't start bleeding again?
I took her offer for a pair of gloves. She gave me a set of her gloves, the extremely long ones that went all the way up to my bicep, so I rolled them down to my forearms. I took off my bandages and put some under the gloves so I wouldn't stain them in case I started bleeding. We went to the mats and sparred for a while.
Topi placed quite a bit of effort into the fights, but I was able to exhaust her and take the win most times. Each time I pinned her, she had a look of surprise on her face. Her eyes seemed like they had a flame within them. She wouldn't push me off her either. She would just pant and stare up at me without moving. We sparred and play fought into the late afternoon, and after a break, we went out hunting again. I kept her gloves on, as they did a very good job of protecting my knuckles from being torn. We stayed out for a few hours. Almost every 15 minutes a new group of Sellians would appear, and we would defeat them. As time went on, our fights became much more coordinated. We predicted each other's moves better, we communicated more, and we understood each other better. Topi was the stronger, harder hitter, and I was the lighter, more agile one. Topi was still very mobile, not staying in the same place for long, but I would bounce around each individual enemy. I tried to break up packs so Topi and I could take care of them at a better pace. We stayed out until evening and went back to the dojo when it started to get dark. "Today was a great day, right, Topi?" I floated, not expecting her to reply. "Yes, I enjoyed this day as well," she replied, trying to be enthusiastic. "We did a lot together today." "We sure did. We beat the crap out of those Sellians. Meeting your pal Kazuri was nice." "Oh, she told you her nickname," Topi replied flatly. We arrived back at the dojo shortly after our conversation. We quickly cleaned ourselves up and got ready to bed since the daylight was waning. While I was lying in bed, I felt that I was now making a connection to Topi. She seemed much more comfortable around me, not having to keep an intense watch on me while fighting or in the dojo. Her demeanor around me was much more relaxed as well. I couldn't tell what changed, but something did. Maybe we were becoming friends. Chapter 4. The next day was more of the same. Wake up early, get ready, and head out to fight. Topi warned me that we were going to be out a lot longer than usual today, and that I should prepare myself adequately. I did as she asked, and managed to keep up with her all the way to midday when she took us back to the dojo. While we took our break, I asked her about how I was doing. "Am I still doing well?" We were out there for quite a while. "Do I still fight well over time?" "Yes, you do. You're a proficient fighter." Thanks. I felt like I was slipping there at the end, letting myself get a little too loose. "Oh, is there anything you want to ask me?" She thought for a while and asked, "Why did you choose to stay with me?" "Ooh, good question," I playfully replied. I took a moment to consider how I should reply. I didn't want to suggest that I was being selfish or say something that meant I was using her for protection. I needed to be very careful with how I replied. "You're unique. When you said that you hunted Sellians, I knew right then that you're unlike any other friend I would meet. Your will to fight for those who can't told me right then that I should stay with you so I could help you in any way I could. You've got a heart of gold." She digested my words for a moment, the familiar blank stare looking back at me as she processed them. "That is what you think of me," she stated, more than asked. "Yeah, you're so..." I trailed off. Her gaze was now subtly different. Before, she would almost stare through me, like she was trying to see what I was thinking. Now she stared into my eyes, looking at me. Her eyes possessed the flickers of flames I saw when we were play fighting, but now there was a look of longing as well. Just as soon as I noticed it, her expression changed back to her usual self. I didn't dare to pry any further with flattery of her. I knew I had said enough to get my point across. I see," she returned. She looked forward and deliberately blinked a few times. I felt embarrassed that I made myself sound like I desperately wanted to be her friend, or like I was begging for her attention. I didn't feel that way at all. I just wanted to become her partner for fighting. She stood up, retrieved a Japari bun, and split it with me. While eating, I thought about what would happen if we got hungry while out, or more pressing, if we were injured. We might not be near the dojo when that happens, so we would need to have something that we could bring along with us. I devised a plan for a small bag we could carry around with us that had everything we needed and could also be dropped before a fight. My backpack was too large for this use, but I found a more suitable, satchel-like bag in Topi's room. It was like a triangular backpack, but smaller, had only one strap, and was much easier to drop than a normal backpack. In addition, it didn't have to be worn as a backpack. It could also be used comfortably like a mail bag, around the shoulder and down to the side if desired. I placed some improvised medical supplies we had inside: scissors, cloth, gauze, band-aids, and water to start. I also put in some snacks for the both of us and additional water in case we were out longer than usual or either of us got hungry. I continued refining the contents of the bag, thinking of things to add or remove until Topi said it was time to hunt again. I took the bag with me to try out the setup. Overall, it was nice to have around, if a little cumbersome to drop before a fight. It was still very easy to keep on and extremely nice to have around in case either of us got hurt. Thankfully, we didn't need to use it, and my plan of dropping it and picking it up later worked very well. I even let Topi take the bag for a bit, letting her get used to the weight and feel of it. When we got back to the dojo after our hunting adventure, Topi thanked me for my mindfulness of our needs. She also had the idea to have something with her to take care of injuries, but she could never find the right thing to use to carry supplies. Afterward, we got ready for bed. We still had a lot of sunlight left in the day, but Topi went to bed early anyway. I only found out she went to bed because I went to ask her a question, but found her fast asleep. She looked very relaxed and peaceful in her slumber, instead of the tense and serious Topi I knew. When I went to bed, I noticed how rough my blue mat bed setup was, and grew a little annoyed with it. I considered taking a trip to the other Apple building near the library to see if I could find a mattress, just so I could sleep a little better than the balled-up linens I was currently lying upon. The next day, Topi slept in a little longer than usual. It was much brighter outside when she woke me up, the interior of the dojo brighter as well. She wasn't as hurried with getting ready, but she was still prepared to go out hunting. On the way out, I made sure to bring the backpack along with us. We were out for quite a while. There were significantly fewer Sellians this day. I joked that we got rid of them all yesterday and now we're just doing cleanup duty. We still had enough to do, but toward midday we grew bored of wandering around in circles. Topi took us far away from the dojo to a spot we hadn't been to yet, and on the way over, we met up with Kazuri. She was exploring off the trails for a while, and we happened to cross paths. She noticed the backpack almost immediately, and I explained its purpose when questioned. She liked it, and asked for some of the Japari bun I had since she hadn't had anything to eat that day. I shared some with her, and she scarfed it down, just like the ravenous nature of a wolverine. Shortly after her lunch, we came across a pack of Sellians. I dumped the bag and got right to work. Our fight was quite close quarters, despite the wide area we were in. I felt that I was always too close to Topi or Kazuri, their sharp attacks getting too close for comfort several times. It didn't help that the Sellians attempted to surround each of us individually, making my boxing strategy not work as well. Thankfully, I managed to get through the fight untouched by friend or foe. I noticed that Topi and Kazuri worked well together, even better than Topi and I did. They seemed to worry less about each other's fights. Instead, they guarded each other's backs more than they fought together. After the fight, all three of us headed back to the dojo. We didn't realize just how far away we went, and it took us close to an hour to get back. We all took a well-deserved rest from the sun and relaxed in the dojo's shelter. Once we finished our break, we set out hunting again. Our fights were much closer to the dojo this time, and similarly closer to each other. I had to shout at the two to spread out mid-battle, as we came dangerously close to hitting each other a few times. Once we adjusted, our fighting became much easier. We didn't have to worry about spacing as much. The three of us weren't the best at the start, but as time went on, we grew much more adapted as a group. Kazuri had to leave after a few fights. She had to go meet up with her friend to escort them through the forest, and she was late. She bid us farewell and ominously requested, more so begged us, to be careful around each other. We assured her we would, and she went to do her bidding. The next fight went without a hitch. I felt entirely in my element, and stayed within my bounds of what I was capable of. My punches felt refined, and my kicks were strong, a noticeable improvement over the last few days. After the fight, I felt a little sore from the day's activities, but was okay to keep going. In the following battle, I started feeling weaker as the fight progressed. When I would fire a punch off, I would get good contact, however my muscles felt powerless, like my arms were limp. It made me slower and less able to react. Near the end, right as I was feeling my weakest, I faced off against a blue tripedal Sellian. I threw what should have been a strong punch at it, but it came out powerless and didn't land any damage. It returned the attack by forming an appendage and throwing its own punch back at me, landing in my gut. The blow knocked me to the ground, and I felt the outline of my guts being stirred around from the hit. The sensation filled me with a pulse of adrenaline, but it was immediately replaced with weakness. I tried to scramble away, but my powerless limbs prevented me from moving. I had to lie still for a moment to gain some energy so I could force myself up. Topi killed the rest of the Sellians that were above me as she saw me go down, and pulled me up to my feet. I managed to stumble away undetected as Topi finished off the rest of the Sellian pack. I sat back against the tree as my arms and legs trembled from weakness and waited for Topi to finish the battle. She took very little time to defeat the rest of the group and immediately came to my aid with the backpack in tow. As she walked toward me, I saw a bright amber glow fade from her eyes, returning to her normal deep brown. She wordlessly checked me over, searching for cuts or bruises. She had me drink the water in the bag, placing it in my mouth without asking. I felt some energy come back to me as the water went through me. She observed my arms and saw that they were shaking. "You're shaking," she alerted me. "I'm really sore, weak," I managed to quietly squawk out. "Shh, save your energy." She then lifted my shirt and rubbed my tummy, searching for any bruises or sore spots made from the blow I took earlier. She asked if anything hurt, and I shook my head no. She lowered my shirt and put her hand over my heart to feel my heartbeat. She held her hand to my chest for a long while and remarked that my heart felt strong to her. She gave me another drink afterward and asked me to rest. She kept a careful watch of me as I laid back against the tree. My muscles ached even while I was sitting still, and moving made my whole body hurt. I tried flexing my arm muscles to get used to the searing pain, but Topi asked me to stop so I wouldn't tire myself needlessly. She let me rest for a few more minutes and asked if I had enough energy to walk. I replied yes, and she lifted me up onto my feet. As I put my weight onto my legs, it felt as if they were being highlighted. Not entirely with pain, but with unease and shakiness. Topi guided me through my first steps on my weakened legs, picked up our things, and then began our journey back to the dojo. I trudged through the pain, zoning it out of my mind by watching Topi's Bovid-esque tail flip around as she walked. I kept my focus on it to distract myself from the distance we had to cover to get back, instead making her tail my constantly moving finish line. When we finally arrived back at the dojo, Topi gave me warm water and food, and helped me into bed. She was unusually caring to me throughout the whole ordeal, seeming genuinely concerned for my health. It wasn't as far as cradling me in her arms and singing me to sleep, but she made it a point to ensure I was okay, much more than she did before. She checked in on me several times throughout the rest of the day and gave me plenty of food and water. By sundown, I felt much better, and it ends right there, I didn't write it. Anyway, I would like to give a big thank you to, I don't want to say who, or even hint at who. I'd like to say thank you. You've really given me the motivation to keep writing, programming, voice acting. It means a lot to me. Like, a lot. Thank you.